welcome back to the IoT Developer Masterclass. In this video, we will be discussing IoT architectures and we'll be looking at a simple design of an IoT architecture. Please feel free to like, comment, and share these videos. And now let's get right into it. So we have sensors located here and actuators. So I think here's a temperature sensor, here's a humidity sensor, here's a vibration sensor, and then here's an actuator, like a robotic arm, that can change things in the environment. And we have a microcontroller that takes data from these sensors and also sends data probably to the to the actuators, right? So now within the microcontrollers can accumulate that data from the sensor and pass it over to the gateway. Sometimes you could have the microcontrollers directly send it to the IoT hub. Here's the IoT hub, generally located on the cloud. So yeah, this is an ESP8266, or it could be an ESP32. But we could have that collect data from the sensors, send that either through a gateway or directly, since this already has a Wi-Fi with it, right, to an IoT hub. Now, these IoT hubs, they're on the cloud, and it could be a WebSocket, it could be an MQTT, could be a different protocol. It could also be a REST client. All right, it collects data from this the sensor data, and depending on how we would like to route this, it could route it directly to the database, or depending on how this is designed, right? Or there could be like a function like a pub sub attached to this. So basically, this is a pub sub, like an event hub that trigger events are triggered depending on the type of data that you send. So if you send maybe a device type of data that has to do with device settings or device tree, or what devices are connected to what other devices, right? That could trigger an event depending on the type of data. Remember, I talked about making your system very flexible so they can take different type of devices, right? So depending on the type of device you send, it could trigger a device management pub sub or event hub, and that could route it to a function, a cloud function, which then maybe does some little processing and saves it in the right section of the database, right? If you send telemetry data, so you send data from the sensors, the sensor readings, right? You could that could pass through the telemetry data management pub sub, and then that triggers the function that is in charge of that data type of data, and it can do some processing and save it in the right database. Now we just have a central database here, but generally there are different types of databases, right? Different type of database with different types of data stars. So it could be relational databases, key value pair databases, right? Time series databases. You could also have blobs, depending on what type of database that you're using, right? So we could have notifications. So if there's an alert, right? If there is an alert, you could have that will once it gets to the hub, this notification management event hub will be triggered, which will then send that data to this notification management function, and then that gets sent to processed and sent to the database. Now, you'd also see there is some action here that, especially when you're sending notification or telemetry, you might have that connected to a WebSocket service, right? So that could also go into a WebSocket service for people. For if your system is using live data and somebody's connected and monitoring the system from somewhere. So here's the users. The users might be connected and monitoring the system. So they could get that data either through a WebSocket, right? And which they could show that data on a UI, right? You could also have a provisioning service. Now, depending on how your system is designed, it could grow through the IoT hub, or it could want to check if something is configured in the IoT hub. Well, the provisioning service generally provisions the device to the system, right? So, sometimes you might not want just anybody to be able to register into your system, right, with any device. So you might have some special key, API key or a secret key, or it could be a certificate that comes within the device, right? X509 certificate that comes in the device, and based on that, provision, you could use that to provision the device. The case is also where you could use a device management APIs to provision a device, and then just put the key in the device, and then that device can use that to connect to the hub. But generally, not a system, a device can't just connect to a hub directly. It needs to be provisioned, right? So that you, especially for security reasons, so that you're sure that that device really belongs to the system, right? So depending on the key, security key or certificate that's in the device, you can use that to provision it, or you could provision it from an API and then store a key that that device will use to connect to the hub, and you could have that use the provisioning service, and based on the provisioning service logic, right, it could store the data about that device, maybe a device ID or information about that device, right? It could store that in the database. Now, there are other services that we'd like to consider. You need an authentication and authorization service, right? So this is an auth service so that users can register to your system. They could, you can also authenticate users, and validate that certain users have access to certain things before they access those data, right, in the database. And that's really very important. Now, you could have like a job service, right, for data analytics, especially if you have a business case that you're running on your IoT system. So there might be certain data that's stored in the database, and certain jobs are triggered at a certain time of the day to do some analysis on that data and store that analysis made in a different section of the database, in a different database, right? And so that you can process and you can understand the system as the system. As the system gets more data, you can kind of process that information and be able to make business decisions from there, right? You could also have a machine learning service, right? So if you have a lot of sensors that monitor, let's say you build in a medical device, and there are a lot of sensors that monitor the working condition of that medical device, right? So you could want to save that information from those sensors. So these sensors monitor the circuitry and other things in that device. Maybe it's an expensive device, and it stores it in a database. And using the telemetry service, telemetry data management service, right? So once it stores it in the database, you can have your machine learning algorithm pick that up, do some analysis on it, just make sure that machine is working fine, right? Based off of, you would have developed some data models, some machine learning models to actually do that. And if everything's okay, fine, but, you could also use it for business cases also, very wide areas that you could use this for. So basically, these are okay. So these are some of the core components that make it work. There could, they're different things generally. I think I'm missing this diagram is missing like a service for sending data to the device, but that could also, that could also happen from the device management service. You like if you needed to send like a command to the device to actually take an action, right? You should be able to do that through the hub, your IoT hub. All right. So here we have our application layer. So this is just REST APIs. Like you could open this up on a Swagger where people can connect to your service, right? So you definitely need APIs for creating, registering, and setting up users, giving users profiles or access to certain things. You need an API service for that. You definitely need an API service for managing your device and sending commands, right? So maybe you sent a command for a device to take a certain action. Probably do that through here, right? To go to the device. You need an API for firmware management. So let's say, you're you need new firmware on your device, you could send that over the hub, or you could send that to a blob somewhere and trigger it from the hub, and the device can go to the blob to download it. However, you want to design different types of designs. And here's your telemetry management. So I know we talked about using the WebSockets to view telemetry, but that's usually good if you want to view live data. So as the data is coming in, immediately you get data. You want to see live data. But let's say you wanted to do a huge pool of a lot of data from the database over a specific date range. You might want to consider using a REST API for that, because that's a larger amount of data to query your database and pull that. You could use like a time series database to store that information, right? So, and it could pull that all that data, and then you could show that, right? And then the business services. So, depending on what your application does, right? You could have APIs that actually take care of that. Here's just a load balancer to ensure you could scale properly. And then the users. So you can see a user can use different types of devices. It could be a computer, tablet, smartwatch, Alexa, Google Home, Google Assistant, right? So, yeah, so that's generally it. So this is a simple IoT architecture, very simple. It's a lot more complicated than it looks. But we're gonna try to simplify it as we develop our system. We're gonna try to build something simple, not too complicated, and we're gonna look at things that are available in the market that might speed up development. We'll look at what we could use to speed up development so that we can get something really good. And thank you for staying to the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please feel free to like, comment, and share these videos. And I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.